The candles in Ashcombe Manor had already been put out for the night, but Leora Hartwell was still awake, kneeling by the fireplace with her arms full of ash and cold cinders. Her fingers were black with soot, and her back ached from bending over the same hearth she had cleaned every night for the past 6 years. Somewhere upstairs she could hear her stepsister Isolde laughing, her voice bright and careless, the way it always sounded when she was getting exactly what she wanted. Tonight, what Isolde wanted was the mating ball. Leora had heard about it for weeks. Every wolf in the kingdom of Veremore, from the lowest servant to the highest lord, had been talking about nothing else. Once every generation, the Alpha King opened his palace doors to the entire territory, and any unmated wolf could attend in the hope of finding their fated mate. It was said that when 2 true mates touched for the first time, a silver mark would appear on their skin, glowing faintly, warm as sunlight. It was rare, it was sacred, and it was the only way anyone truly knew, without doubt, that they had found the person meant for them. Leora had never let herself hope she might be invited. Her stepmother, Countess Renata, had made it clear from the day Leora's father died that there would be no ball gowns, no invitations, and no attention wasted on a girl who was, in Renata's words, better suited to the kitchen than the court. "You will stay home tonight," Renata said, sweeping past Leora in the hallway, dressed in deep emerald silk. "Isolde needs no competition." Leora lowered her eyes and said nothing. She was used to saying nothing. But after the carriage rolled away into the dark, carrying Renata and Isolde toward the palace, an old woman appeared at the kitchen door. It was Mabel, the healer who lived at the edge of the village, the same woman Leora had nursed through a fever 3 winters ago, without asking for anything in return. "I have not forgotten what you did for me," Mabel said, pulling a folded bundle from beneath her cloak. Inside was a gown the color of moonlight, simple but beautiful, and a pair of silver slippers that fit as though they had been made for her. "Go, child. You deserve one night that belongs only to you." Leora's hands trembled as she touched the fabric. "If my stepmother finds out, she will be too busy watching her own daughter to notice you," Mabel said gently. "Go, before you talk yourself out of it." The palace was lit like a second sunrise when Leora arrived, golden light spilling from every window, music drifting out into the cool night air. She slipped in through a side entrance, her heart pounding, feeling like an impostor among the silk gowns and jeweled collars of the other guests. She kept to the edges of the great hall, half hidden behind a marble pillar, simply grateful to see the ball at least once in her life. That was when she saw him. Alpha King Draven Ashcombe stood at the top of the hall, tall and composed, his dark eyes moving over the crowd with the quiet authority of a man used to being obeyed. He was not smiling. He looked, Leora thought, like someone enduring the evening rather than enjoying it. And then, for reasons she could not explain, his gaze lifted and found hers across the crowded room. The air seemed to change. It was not a large moment. He did not cross the hall. She did not move from her pillar. But something in her chest pulled toward him, warm and certain, like a thread drawing tight between 2 hearts. Draven's eyes stayed on her for one long breath, too, and Leora felt, for the first time in her life, seen. Then Isolde stepped directly into his path. "Your Majesty," Isolde said, her voice sweet as honey, her golden gown catching the candlelight. She reached for his hand before he could offer it, wrapping her fingers around his wrist with practiced confidence. A murmur rippled through the hall, then a gasp. A silver mark bloomed across Isolde's skin, faint but visible, curling like a vine from her wrist toward her palm. "It is the mark," someone cried. "The Alpha King has found his mate." Renata appeared instantly at her daughter's side, beaming with triumph, already accepting congratulations from nearby nobles as though the wedding had already happened. Leora stood frozen by the pillar, her own hand pressed against her chest, the warmth she had felt moments ago turning cold and confused inside her. "That girl does not belong here," Renata said suddenly, her sharp eyes finding Leora across the hall. "Guards, remove her. She has no invitation." 2 palace guards moved toward Leora before she could protest. She did not fight them. There was no point. She let herself be steered toward the side door, casting one last look toward the king, who was staring at Isolde's wrist, with an expression Leora could not quite read. It was not joy, it was doubt. Draven Ashcombe had felt many things in his life as Alpha King, but he had never felt a false mate mark before, and something about the one now glowing faintly on Isolde Hartwell's wrist did not sit right in his chest. There was no warmth radiating from her skin, no pull drawing him closer, none of the quiet recognition he had heard described by every mated wolf he had ever spoken with. There was only silence. He said nothing to the court. A king did not accuse a young woman in front of half the kingdom without proof. But as musicians resumed playing and Isolde clung happily to his arm, accepting well wishes from lords and ladies, Draven quietly signaled his beta, Commander Aldrich, to follow him from the hall. "Something is wrong," Draven said, once they were alone in a side chamber. "The mark on Lady Isolde's wrist. I felt nothing when it appeared." Aldrich frowned. "Perhaps it takes time to settle, my lord." "No." Draven shook his head firmly. "I have seen true mate marks before. My own parents bore them until the day they died. There is always warmth, always a pull. I felt none of that tonight, not with her." He paused, remembering the pillar at the edge of the hall, the pale-haired girl in the moonlight gown, the way something in his chest had tightened the instant their eyes met. "But I felt something," he said quietly, "with someone else." Aldrich's eyebrows lifted. "The girl the guards removed. Find out who she is," Draven said, quietly, "and send for Elder Wynn. I want to know if there is any way to forge a mark." Elder Wynn arrived within the hour, an ancient wolf with silver hair and sharp, knowing eyes, who had served 3 generations of Ashcombe kings. She examined the description Draven gave her with grave interest. "There is a way," she admitted slowly. "An alchemical ink, rare and costly, made from crushed moonflower root and silver dust. Painted onto the skin, it can mimic the appearance of a true mark for several hours. But it is only an illusion, my king. A true mark carries warmth and a bond that deepens with touch. A false one is cold. It also fades far faster than it should, usually before the sun rises, leaving no trace behind." Draven's jaw tightened. "Then we will know the truth before dawn." "And the real mark?" Wynn asked. "If it exists, then it will still be there," Draven said, "warm and whole, no matter how long we wait." Leora had barely made it past the palace gates when a firm hand caught her arm. She turned, startled, to find Commander Aldrich standing behind her, flanked by 2 guards who suddenly looked far less interested in escorting her out and far more interested in escorting her back inside. "The king wishes to speak with you," Aldrich said simply. "Me?" Leora's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I think there has been some mistake. I was already asked to leave." "There has been no mistake," Aldrich said, his tone almost gentle now. "Please, come with me." She followed him back through the palace, her heart hammering with confusion, until they reached a quiet garden courtyard lit by lanterns and moonlight. Draven stood waiting near a stone fountain, his dark eyes finding hers the instant she entered, that same pull from the ballroom returning full force, stronger now that they stood only a few feet apart. "I don't understand," Leora said softly. "Your Majesty, I have no right to be here. Your mate is inside, celebrating with my family." "Is she?" Draven asked quietly. He studied her face for a long moment. "What is your name?" "Leora," she said. "Leora Hartwell." Something shifted in his expression, as though the name confirmed a suspicion he had been holding since the moment he saw her across the hall. "Leora," he repeated, "will you allow me to take your hand? Only for a moment. I need to know something, and I believe you may already sense what it is." Leora hesitated, glancing nervously toward the palace windows, half expecting Renata to appear and drag her away again. But something in Draven's steady gaze made her feel, for the first time in years, that her answer actually mattered. She held out her hand. The moment his fingers closed around hers, warmth spread up her arm like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long winter. A silver mark bloomed instantly across her wrist, brighter and steadier than anything Isolde had displayed in the ballroom, curling in delicate patterns up toward her palm. Draven's breath caught, and Leora watched, stunned, as a matching mark appeared on his own wrist, glowing in perfect harmony with hers. "There it is," Draven said softly, wonder threading through his voice, the true mark. Tears gathered in Leora's eyes before she could stop them. I don't understand, Isolde already. Isolde's mark was false, Draven said gently, painted on with alchemical ink to deceive the court, and me. It will fade before sunrise, exactly as Elder Wynn warned. Yours will not. This bond is real, Leora. I felt it the moment I saw you across the hall, and I have felt nothing but certainty since. Leora pressed her free hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. 6 years of being unseen, unwanted, and unheard, and now the Alpha King of Veremore stood before her, holding her hand as though he had been waiting his whole life to find her. We must return to the hall, Draven said, before dawn. The court deserves the truth, and so do you. The great hall was still bright with music and celebration. When Draven returned, Leora's hand held firmly in his own. The room fell silent almost instantly, dozens of eyes shifting from the king to the soot-stained girl at his side, then to Isolde, who stood frozen near the refreshment table, her golden gown suddenly looking far less triumphant. Elder Wynn, Draven called, his voice carrying easily across the hushed hall. Please examine Lady Isolde's mark. Wynn moved forward and gently took Isolde's wrist. The silver pattern that had bloomed so proudly hours earlier was already dulling at the edges, fading unevenly like ink washed by rain. It is fading, my king, Wynn announced. Unnaturally fast, exactly as forged marks do. There is no warmth beneath it. This is not a true bond. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Renata's face drained of color. Isolde tried to pull her wrist back, stammering something about exhaustion and candlelight, but the damage was already done. Before the assembled court, in front of lords, ladies, and half the kingdom, Draven raised Leora's hand instead, revealing the mark still glowing bright and unfaded on her skin. This is my true mate, he said clearly, his voice steady with conviction. Leora Hartwell, the mark appeared the moment we touched, and it has not faded, nor will it. I will not stand beside a lie when the truth stands beside me already. The hall erupted into murmurs of astonishment, but Draven paid them no mind. He turned to Leora, who stood trembling, overwhelmed, tears slipping freely down her cheeks now. You do not have to be afraid anymore, he said quietly, just for her. Not of your stepmother, not of being unseen. I see you, Leora. I have seen you since the moment you walked into that hall. Outside, the first pale light of dawn was beginning to touch the horizon, spilling gently through the tall windows of the palace. Isolde's mark had vanished completely by the time the sun cleared the hills, leaving no trace it had ever existed. But the mark on Leora's wrist remained, warm and steady, exactly as Elder Wynn said a true bond always would. Renata and Isolde were quietly escorted from the palace before the morning meal was served, their scheme unraveled in front of the very court they had hoped to impress. There would be no titles, no advantageous marriage, no revenge against the stepdaughter they had spent years dismissing. Their plan had only pushed Leora directly into the life they had always tried to keep from her. Leora stood beside Draven on the palace balcony as the sun rose fully over Veremore, its light catching the silver mark on her wrist and making it shimmer like something out of an old story, the kind she used to tell herself late at night to survive the loneliest years of her life. Draven's hand found hers, steady and warm, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Leora let herself believe that the story might finally be a happy one. "Ready to meet your kingdom?" Draven asked softly. Leora looked out over the golden light spreading across the palace grounds, then up at the man beside her, and smiled. "Yes," she said, "I think I finally am."